Bitter winds whipped my scarf ends as I hurried along the creaking pier, bulky package tucked under one arm. All around, rocking boats knocked together, rigging ringing a discordant chorus. Across the steel-gray water, the town glimmered festively, wreaths and lights winking through the gloaming. I checked my watch as I navigated the precarious planks. Nearly 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The sailors would be gathering soon for their annual holiday bonfire, trading stories over spiked eggnog as they roasted oysters around the crackling flames. I smiled despite the cold clawing my cheeks. The firelight and fellowship would make a welcome break before I ferried home. Approaching the Maryland Queen, where she bobbed alongside her tired sisters, I called up to the wheelhouse. "Permission to come aboard, Captain Stavros?" The gray-whiskered sailor waved me over. "Come on, Joe. Got that tuna casserole for my Christmas dinner?" I held up the foil-wrapped dish my mama sent. "Compliments of Mama Rose's kitchen." Stavros grinned widely. "Bless that woman. Gets lonely on the holidays with my boys so far away." Sympathy softened my smile. Most sailors here had left family behind to follow the ocean's call. I was proud to ferry for this little harbor that had been my late father's home. The crew were like uncles to me. After stowing the meal for Stavros, I glanced reluctantly back at the beckoning warmth of the twinkling town. The growing wind made the sea choppy, and the light too dim for comfort. As I turned toward shore, Stavros caught my elbow, his jovial mood replaced by a grim frown. "You stay right here tonight, Joe. There's a bad storm brewing beyond the bay." I peered uneasily over the dark metallic water. "How can you tell?" Stavros nodded out at the steel-bellied waves advancing remorselessly past the sheltering harbor mouth. "Tides turned faster than I've ever seen, almost like it's being chased. Mark my words, girl. Something ungodly is headed this way." Ice rippled down my neck as I stared where he pointed. The tide did seem to boil like no natural swell I'd witnessed before. What sinister curl of currents could drive such a brewing menace to our haven's gate? As if summoned by Stavros's words, the wind intensified to a banshee screech. Wheel chains rattled wildly as boats bucked against their moorings. Across the bay, festive lights blackened in a sudden, impossible wall of gloom surging inland, swallowing the cheerful town whole. Fear and confusion quickened my breath. This was no natural front. It carried a swell of evil beneath it straight for our vulnerable harbor. From the twisting dark, a muffled explosion echoed. Then grinding, wrenching, torrents blasted over the docks, coating the boats with oily water. I clung to Stavros on the tilting deck, blinking against stinging brine. When at last the surge passed, we raised watering eyes to piercing spotlights, raking the ravaged pier. My fists curled in helpless rage. The Coast Guard station where my father once served now glowed an infernal red, flames streaming skyward as the swelling darkness consumed it. "Abandon ship!" the cry rang from one stranded vessel. "She's taking water fast!" Men spilled from listing boats with sloshing buckets and battered pumps, fighting the inexorable drag toward the hungry depths. Soaked and shivering, I joined Stavros hauling emergency life rings to toss toward wheezing, salt-crusted sailors battling the mounting torrents. Grimly we fought the brutal waves now breaking against our foundering ships with unnatural precision, like a conscious assault testing our harbor's vulnerable flank. Each vessel slowly sank beneath the swelling tide, one by one severed from their strained lines until only Stavros's sturdy Mary alone kept her post. I glanced desperately toward shelter. The Coast Guard boathouse crouched like a concrete cave just past the submerged end of the pier. If we could just get there, we might weather this diabolical surge. Stavros's huge hand engulfed mine, his eyes iron with purpose. "Stay close now, hear me, girl? Whatever comes, you stick by me." Blindly I nodded, blinking frozen lashes against sheeting rain as we leapt into the black surge. My feet slipped and skidded over unseen hazards, ears filled with howling wind and cries of dying men. I clung fiercely to Stavros's calloused grip, like a lifeline in that endless liquid chaos. Finally, we crashed against the boathouse wall. After an agonizing battle with the locked door, we tumbled inside, sealing the storm outside with the heavy barrier. In the cavity's black womb, surrounded by the enemy's unearthly cacophony, I clung shivering to the only proof this wasn't hell itself. kind Captain Stavros solid beside me in the roaring dark. By faint emergency lamps, we huddled on the chill concrete, the flood battering the walls as if seeking prey. When at last the tide's fury ebbed, we emerged under an impossible dawn. No rose-gold Santa hats or strings of merry lamps remained, only bloated bodies tangled in debris along a corpse-gray beach. The village was gone, sunken into the bay, now strangely receded past its harbor bones, as if whatever evil current drove, it had escaped into the deep. In eerie silence, Stavros and I picked through the Ravagate dock, two souls spared inexplicably. By unspoken pact, we turned our backs on the defiled coast. My kind captain had lost his home along with so many unsuspecting others, all on a night that should have glowed with friendship, belly laughs, and hope renewed. As we retreated arm in arm from the terrible tide, I swore to give Stavros sanctuary this wounded Christmas. Somewhere bells jangled a tinny mockery of tidings of comfort and joy. No more would the season's sparkling lights halo my harbor home after such festering darkness inhabited its breast. A lone chill carried from the brooding sea whispered, no place would ever be truly safe again. Jingle bell, jingle bell rock. The same tired Christmas tune blared from the mall speakers for the 100th time that day, fraying my last nerve as I rang up another customer at Holt's department store. I forced a smile at the shopper and her cranky child, handing back her change with my red and green striped glove. Happy holidays and thanks for shopping, Holt's. The mother offered a relieved half smile as she dragged her kid toward the glittering mall exits. I sighed, sagging against the cash wrap. Just 2 more hours until closing time on Christmas Eve. I prayed for strength to get through the final holiday shopping rush without ripping off my hideous felt elf hat and going full Krampus on some customers. Leaning on her broom, my co-worker Betty gave me a sympathetic chuckle. Chin up, Alice. Just think of that sweet overtime pay. I managed a wan smile back. Good old Betty, always seeing the best in things. She'd been at this mall longer than anyone, cleaning up messes and listening to tearful employees spill their guts at hot dog on a stick over by the central fountain. If anyone knew how to survive the retail holiday trenches, it was Betty. The minutes limped by until the last few shoppers filtered out, arms loaded with gaily wrapped presents. As I totaled the day's receipts with grateful relief, the lights dimmed weirdly for a moment. Betty paused, her sweeping frowning. Darn wiring. It's older than me around here. I shrugged, more focused on getting to Christmas dinner at my sister's place. But before I could grab my coat, shrieks echoed from deeper in the mall, followed by a thunderous crash. My head jerked up in alarm as all the lights died, plunging the mall into darkness. Grabbing Betty's shaking wrist, I reached under the counter for the flashlight stashed there. Its weak beam revealed nothing but garish decorations and our scared faces. What's happening? I whispered. Before Betty could reply, a blood-curdling howl split the eerie gloom beyond our store, so full of anguish it froze my pounding heart. The creature that made such a noise could only come from the deepest pits of hell itself. Then came the wet, rending sounds of flesh tearing open. Betty gasped in horror beside me. I swept the feeble flashlight beam through the dark and caught a flicker of movement. Some large figure lumbered by the dim exit signs, growling gutturally as it dragged something heavy along the mall floor, leaving a glistening wet trail in its wake. Pulse jack-rabbiting in my throat, I doused the light. In the renewed blackness, Betty gripped my hand painfully tight. Noises filtered through the dark. Terrible ripping sounds followed by spine-chilling howls that reverberated everywhere at once. There were more of the fiends now, hunting, feeding, and soon they would find us cowering here like helpless prey. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, but only empty static answered. Jamming the useless phone into my pocket, I squeezed Betty's arm, and together we slipped silently from behind the counter, inching our way along the wall toward the back exit doors that were always locked after close. Mercifully, some forgotten Christmas lights still glowed along the walls, casting just enough of an eerie glow for us to navigate through the stockrooms. The unearthly cries and butchery continued somewhere behind us, spurring us into a low, crouched run. We only had a small head start on those prowling beasts. Halfway down the storage corridor, my foot caught on something, sending me crashing to the scuffed floor with a yelp. I bit my lip painfully as Betty helped me up, flashing her light to see what tripped me. Then we both saw it. A severed arm clad in a Holtz employee vest, ragged flesh oozing onto the concrete. Shock and bile rose in my throat. Oh God, that was Javier from menswear. Shaking wildly, I stumbled on. More remains appeared in the bobbing flashlight glow. A hand here, a broken jawbone there, all peppered with shreds of colorful uniforms from mall shops. Acid scorched the back of my throat. A guttural snuffling from around the next corner froze us in our tracks. I locked panicked eyes with Betty, my only thought to shield this sweet old lady who was like a second mom to so many. As quietly as possible, we slipped through the nearest doorway, a small maintenance room, pulling the steel door silently shut behind us. We huddled there, praying our harsh breathing wouldn't give us away. The snuffling grew louder, accompanied by a heavy dragging sound. I clenched my eyes shut, picturing those snapping jaws searching for warm living meat as claws scraped right outside our room. Minutes stretched by endlessly. Finally, the noises moved past, retreating into the distance. A few more agonizing heartbeats went by before I risked cracking the door. No movement. Gripping Betty's clammy hand, I ushered us quickly back into the darkened corridor now strewn with death. The exit had to be close. Sure enough, we stumbled down a short hall into the freezing receiving bay. After some frantic scrabbling at the metal latch, we pushed open the heavy loading door and spilled out gasping behind the mall into the blessed starry Christmas night, a glittering tree calling from the nearby parking lot like a bright beacon of hope. Sirens wailed, streaking red and blue through the skeletal trees as Betty and I collapsed against each other, weeping with gratitude and horror. Whatever evil had erupted inside that suburban shopping mecca, we had somehow survived it. Later, I sat wrapped in a scratchy blanket as EMTs treated me for shock. Police combed the area, but found no monsters baleful or beasts unholy. Just a back hallway filled with slaughtered employees during what should have been a final cheerful shift before Christmas Day. Perhaps in the end, it was human madness behind such senseless violence. But it will haunt me forever. The memory of those terrible, inhuman cries echoing under glittering holiday lights. The bloody fiends that hunted me through those decked and deadly halls. Snow swirled down from the steel-gray sky, icing the thatched rooftops of North Pine Village in a sparkling glaze. Carolers and shoppers in red mittens and woolen caps hurried along the main street, packages tucked under their arms. The tree in the village square glowed with rainbow lights, silver garlands spiraling down its branches. Perched at the very top, the golden star twinkled merrily. But not even the holiday cheer could fully disguise the unease in the villagers' eyes as they cast frequent nervous glances towards the tree line. I hitched up the collar of my grandmother's old fur coat as I walked briskly to the rows of charming gingerbread-trimmed shops, trying to rub some warmth into my leather-gloved fingers. They said a storm was brewing beyond the forest. I hoped to grab a peppermint hot cocoa and do some last-minute Christmas shopping before it hit. The Spiced Cauldron Bakery welcomed me with the sweet scent of cinnamon rolls and warmth from the crackling fireplace in back. Cherry Chatterley, the plump owner, handed me a steaming to-go cup with a cheerful smile that didn't quite reach her worried hazel eyes. "Hurry home now, dearie. Those woods won't stay quiet for long," she cautioned. With a nod, I ducked back into the blustering wind. I peered around at my neighbors making their own nervous preparations for the long night ahead. Old Abraham Morley had just finished hammering boards across the windows of Morley's bait and tackle shop. Meanwhile, Beatrice Blackwell hurried from store to store, battered lantern in hand. "Candles, candles everywhere, but not a bulb to light," she lamented. The entire village had lost power sometime before dawn, cloaking the snow-laden forest in menacing darkness once more. The generator was on the fritz again. As I trudged reluctantly back to my little stone cottage on the village outskirts, I glanced over my shoulder towards those skeletal woods that loomed at the top of the hill. The animals had gone quiet today. Not even the hoot of an owl or howl of a coyote pierced the heavy air. The stillness itself seemed baleful, as if the forest held its breath, waiting. I quickened my pace. Once home, I stoked up a blaze in the soot-stained hearth and sank wearily onto my faded settee. Sipping the rich, sweet cocoa, I listened to the wind moan around the eaves, trying to ignore my growing disquiet. It was Christmas Eve tomorrow, a night for joyful carols, not dread. I refused to let ancient superstitions spoil the holiday. Setting down my empty mug, I went to bed, pulling the quilt snug beneath my chin. Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, screaming through the trees like a banshee. I tossed and turned to the remembered tales of monsters in the wood. Just stories, I told myself firmly. The past was dead, buried beneath the snow. Around 2 a.m., by the glow of my wind-up clock, I startled awake. All was deathly quiet now. The storm had faded to an eerie calm. In the window, shadows danced and fluttered oddly. Heart-thumping, I crept to the casement and discovered the source. A murder of crows, circling and cawing, their midnight feathers slick with blood. I slammed the window shut, pulse racing. It's begun, I thought despairingly. After 50 years of silence, the ancient evil stirs once more. Since the winter of '73, North Pine had learned to fear the longest nights, when shrieking winds whipped the forest into a frenzy. They still tell tales of the demon called Krampus, who emerges to snatch naughty children, bundling them into his sack to be dragged down to hell. Of course, no child had actually disappeared, but on those dark nights, families would find animal carcasses displayed on their doorsteps come dawn, entrails arranged in ominous runic shapes. The horror ended when John Morley formed a hunting party. They returned at first light, faces gray with shock, shotguns stained crimson. "It's done," John proclaimed hoarsely before shutting himself away for good, in the log hunting cabin deep in the woods, never to say another word. And so the legend was born. On the longest night, the god of winter will return to claim a new sacrifice unless the guardian in the woods can defeat him once more. John Morley had fulfilled his duty 50 winters past, but John was long dead. Now there was no barrier between the silent trees and the fragile village nestled at their feet. No one in North Pine slept that endless night. Parents held whimpering children tight as hellish shrieks reverberated outside bolted doors. Claws scraped menacingly at the shutters, and in my candlelit kitchen, clutching my grandmother's heirloom dagger with trembling hands, I listened in horror while madness itself seemed unleashed right outside my walls. At long last, gloomy pre-dawn light seeped under the door. The noises faded reluctantly back into the cloaking trees. For now, the longest night had released us. On leaden legs, I ventured outside into the hushed white streets, now imprinted with blood-stained paw prints. My breath caught at the scarlet trail leading straight towards the darkened woods. Townsfolk emerged with faces gray as ashes to follow the dreadful tracks. The hunters readied their rifles with unsteady hands. The sheriff tried in vain to radio for help, but only static answered. Once again the choice stood stark. Face the evil in the woods, or let it invade our home. With quiet courage, we formed our ragged hunting party. Myself, the sheriff, young Tommy Morley, who just turned 13, lanky Rolf Folsom, who ran the hardware shop, kindly widow Doris Blackwell, and her aging hound Blue. I glanced back longingly towards my cozy stone cottage, lantern gleaming in the window. Would I ever sit by that hearth again on a winter's eve, secure in our refuge, or would this be my final farewell? Rifle heavy in my gloved hands, I turned my feet uphill where the twisted oaks stood brooding, skeletal branches clawing the bruised blue sky. Doris murmured prayers under her breath as we stepped across the threshold into the silent woods, leaving all vestiges of warmth and life behind. The bloody tracks led on ahead, an ominous invitation daring us to follow. Hands numb inside mittens, breath puffing out in frozen clouds, we forged ahead along that dreadful trail. The dogs whined, tails clamped low, as a metallic stench filled the icy air. At last we stepped into a sun-starved clearing, upon a sight dragged straight from the bowels of nightmare. In the oozing scarlet snow crouched a hulking figure, hairy limbs streaked red, curved horns silhouette against the gloom. Lidless eyes like smoldering coals, fixed upon us, as its long tongue slowly licked dripping crimson from fangs built for tearing vulnerable flesh. It was the embodiment of every gruesome tale whispered over campfires, the ancient god of darkness, sent to herald the longest night. We had found our monster. Inhaling the coppery stench of blood and terror, I raised my rifle along with the others. Blue's snarls echoed between silent trees as we circled the crouched beast. It tracked our movements with deadened eyes, muscles tensed beneath matted fur. Tommy whimpered, blinking back childish tears of panic. The creature's head swiveled, nostrils flaring as it caught the boy's scent of innocence. With a guttural snarl, it lunged for young Tommy, horns slicing the gray dusk. Shots blasted as we fired in unison, driving the monster backward. Blood spurted from gaping wounds, but still it staggered upright, fangs bared in mindless fury, black claws gouging the frozen earth. We emptied round after round into that relentless fiend as it charged again and again, hell-bent on getting a child to drag back to its subterranean lair. The dogs tore savagely at the thing's ankles, but with a mighty kick, it sent Blue hurtling to the bloody ground, unmoving. Doris screamed, empty rifle clattering to the gore-stained snow. As the last daylight dwindled, we battled desperately on, dodging Visu's strike as from horn and hoof that would easily disembowel. Sweet Perched down my spine, dispitted the bone-numbing cold. Still our bullets seemed useless to stop a demon summoned from hell's steaming depths. I cried out as a swipe of jagged claws laid my forehead open to the bone. Blood poured down my face, turning the scene crimson. The peals of distant church bells announced dusk as we fought on with fading hope. It seemed we would share poor John Morley's fate out there in those endless woods as the light and warmth slowly perished. But then, a shot like thunder shook the clearing. Tommy stood over Blue's motionless old body. The widow's ancient shotgun braced against his heaving chest. Behind him, Rolf and Doris swayed unsteady on their feet but defiant. The sheriff nodded firmly at the gasping boy, a general proud of his unfledged recruit. They would go down fighting until the last. A guttural bellow answered as the demon crashed to its knees, ichor bubbling from the gaping pit where an eye once burned with hellfire. It snarled and spit blood as we advanced with regained purpose. The bells pealed again, brighter now. Our final round found its mark between curled horns, and the icy ground rushed up to meet convulsing limbs. Breathless, trembling with relief, we circled the fallen god. The longest night receded. We had survived. Torchlight pierced the gloaming then as they found us. My fellow villagers come to drive the darkness back. Reverend Stokes pronounced forgiveness for the fallen while widows and mothers searched for life still lingering. Tommy threw his arms around Doris amid joyous tears. Slowly, gently, we turned our feet back homeward, this battle-worn hunting party, leaving the vanquished demon to its unmarked grave in the endless icy woods. The Yule dawn gleamed gold on familiar thatched rooftops clustered around the cheery-lit tree as we limped the final steps back into North Pine. For 50 more years our village will slumber protected till the longest night once more stirs the vile creatures lurking deep within our silent winter woods. But today, warm hearth fires and spiced eggnog await weary souls reunited against unspeakable darkness. Let joyful thanks echo from every candlelit window, for we will live to welcome Christmas morn.